Hi, today I'd like to talk to you about flying geese, and in particular my favorite method called fast flying geese and my wing clipper tool used to trim down those flying geese at the end. But anyway, let me start back at the beginning. What I'd like to do is talk to you about the Flying Goose unit. This is what a unit looks like. Generally it has one quarter square triangle and it has two half square triangles that are on the side. Now when you see this unit in books and patterns and magazines, there are going to be a lot of different ways that are recommended to construct this unit. What I recommend is a method that's called fast flying geese. Now this method also starts with 5 squares. It starts with one big square and it starts with 4 small squares. But the squares are bigger than they need to be. I like to start with my squares slightly oversized so that when I create my Flying Goose unit, and they're going to stay as squares. They're going to eventually become triangles, but they're going to stay as squares for a fairly long period of time. But I'm going to create that unit bigger than it needs to be and then trim it down at the end. So the process is this. The big square will actually end up becoming the one big, or actually it's going to become 4 quarter square triangles, and the 4 small squares are going to become 8 half square triangles. Now, the process is this. I'm going to take those squares and I'm going to take the 2 smaller squares and I'm going to mark a couple of stitching lines that are 1/4 of an inch on either side of the center diagonal. Sometimes I'll position the squares first and then mark them. Sometimes I'll mark them before I put them in place. But when I position them, what I'm going to do is put the squares right sides together. And I'm going to position the small square so that the edge of the square is just inside, about 1/16 of an inch inside the edge of the larger square. So the small squares are nudged toward the center of the larger square. Take a tool like this. I like to use this. It has a lasered line going down the middle of the tool. Put the lasered line on the points of the square and mark 2 stitching lines that are 1/4 of an inch on either side of the center diagonal. Once I've done that, I'm going to then take that unit to my sewing machine and actually stitch on the 2 lines that I've just marked. Once they're stitched, I'm going to go to my cutting mat, take that unit, and cut it on the line that goes in between. Once those are cut, go to the ironing board and you're going to take the unit and you're going to actually press it so that they look like this. Now this is kind of odd looking and you're thinking, how did I get there? This is the unit that was cut here. When I cut it apart, when I go to the iron and press those seams like this, you can see that they're going to give you this type of unit. It almost looks like a heart. Once I have those units, I'm going to take the 2 additional squares, because remember in this set I started with a large green square, just one of those, and I started with 4 of the purple squares that will become the small triangles in my Flying Goose units. And what I'm going to do, I've got 2 lines marked again, 1/4 of an inch on either side of the center diagonal, using a tool like this. Take those 2 squares, position them onto those heart-shaped units with the same idea of just a little bit, a couple of threads about 1/16 of an inch showing from the goose or the large square that's in behind there. Return to your sewing machine and chain stitch these together. And I would do that. I would just chain stitch one right behind the other until they're all stitched together. Once they're stitched, take the units and trim them apart. And when I go to my ironing board then and press, you can see that in a matter of minutes, I'm going to actually end up with 4 Flying Geese units. I like this method. This method doesn't waste any time, it doesn't waste any motions, and it is very, very, very efficient. What I recommend with this method is that you make those units bigger than they need to be so that then you can go about trimming them down. The trim down in the past with rulers that have been on the market have always been a little difficult. So about a year ago, it was in the spring of 2009, I actually created a tool that's called a wing clipper tool. And the wing clipper tool looks like this. This tool has a lot of different diagonal guidelines on it. The one diagonal guideline that is here is a common diagonal. It doesn't matter what size my Flying Goose unit is going to end up being. This line will always be on this diagonal. And then I've got a whole bunch of different diagonals going this way, only one of which is going to properly line up with this other seam so that I can quickly trim this down to size. And what I'm lining up on my tool, on the wing clipper tool, is this. I have one diagonal to line up on this seam, and I have one diagonal to line up on this seam. That's right now, that's the only thing that I'm looking at, are those two diagonal guidelines. I trim up and I trim across, cleaning up that corner of the Flying Goose unit. Take the unit, rotate it around, put the ruler right back down on the unit in the same direction. But what I'm focusing on now when I do my second trim is this. I'm focusing on the 2.5 inch line here, because this is going to be a 2.5 by 4.5 inch unit. But a 2.5 inch line here, 4.5 inch line here, and the little X that's at the nose of the goose to preserve my 1/4 inch on this side. So when I'm done, instead of hoping that my unit is going to end up being a 2.5 by 4.5 inch unit, I know for a fact that it's going to be a 2.5 by 4.5 inch unit. And every unit that I produce is going to end up being exactly the same size. Now the wing clipper tool, when you purchase the tool, comes along with a set of step-by-step directions. When you open them up, it talks about the process that I just talked about. Taking the two small squares, positioning them, marking them, stitching them, trimming them, and pressing them. Step by step how you actually construct the pieces, how you trim down the units if you happen to be a right-handed quilter, how you'll trim down the units if you happen to be a left-handed quilter. The chart here shows you the sizes that you need to be able to create any of the 10 different sizes that are available with the wing clipper tool. So if you're making a pattern, or you're doing a pattern that requires a 2 inch by 4 inch Flying Goose for that pattern, go to the chart, find the finished size of the Flying Goose or the cut size of the Flying Goose. The first column is the finished size, second column is the cut size. This column here gives you the size that I recommend that you cut the large square, and notice it's all in 1/2 inch increments, and the size of the 4 small squares that you'll cut for part of this process, and notice that those are all in 1/2 inch and whole inch increments. So no more cutting those 2 7/8 inch squares. So all you have to do is keep track of the chart, have that wing clipper tool at your disposal, and you're going to be able to make Flying Geese quickly, efficiently, accurately, and the best thing about the tool, it will do it in 10 different sizes for you each and every time you go to make your Flying Geese. So good luck. Look for the wing clipper at your local quilt shop, or order from us, directly from us online, and we'll look forward to seeing lots of your quilts made with the wing clipper tool.